Good morning, good morning. Come on, let's filter on in here. We got plenty of seats up front. I see a few stragglers out there. Well, good morning. Again, I'm Glenn Smith. I'm APPA's Vice President for Professional Development, and it's a real treat for me to get the educational portion of our session kicked off. I hope you all enjoyed Terry Braverman. What do you think? Pretty good, huh? But more importantly, the real key to these conferences are you, the attendees. So I want you to take a moment, give yourselves all a round of applause. You know, some of you know that I spent a former career in the Navy, and I have to admit I'm a little nervous up here because I have a couple of my former bosses in the audience, and one of those gentlemen, Mr. Jack Dempsey, is right up here in front in the orange shirt, so I'm a little bit intimidated. But you know, Jack gave me a lot of advice over the years, and most of it I discarded. But there was one piece of advice that really stuck with me, and he said, whatever you do, if you have a public speaking opportunity, never ever stand in front of a transparent podium. He says, because if your fly's down, everybody's going to know it. Didn't you, Jack? Yeah. It's a true story. Okay. Well, we are really excited to get our educational sessions kicked off here this morning, and we really believe that APPA provides a great opportunity for all of you to network, share information, inspire ourselves, and transform our institutions. We've tried hard to expand the scope of the offerings here in Atlanta to reach out to all the institutions we have represented. Our historically black institutions, our K through 12 institutions, our community colleges, our small liberal arts schools, as well as our large universities. So I really trust that wherever you come from, you're going to find something of value here over the next couple days. So I invite you to take advantage of all the offerings. But before we begin this session, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Kelly Baxley from Siemens Building Technology. You should know that Siemens is one of our most valued sponsors. They've supported APPA for many, many years. Kelly, we really appreciate it. Come on up and get us started here.
Well, good morning, everybody. Excuse me. I'm okay. Well, good morning, APPA Board of Directors, APPA members, and business partners. On behalf of Siemens, the fourth largest employer in the world and deliverer of technical solutions, I'd like to welcome you to the city that hosted the 1996 Summer Olympics and is home to Coca-Cola, Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome. This year, 10 international countries are visiting APPA 2011. How about we recognize these visitors? As I mention your country, could you please stand up and be recognized? Because we really appreciate the international presence. We have Israel, Egypt, Beirut, United Kingdom, South Africa, New Zealand, United Arab Emirates, Tanzania, Trinidad Tobago, and Hong Kong. Thank y'all for making the trip. This morning I have the privilege to introduce the distinguished panelists for today's discussion. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mohammed Kiomi. He began as president at San Jose State University on July 1st, 2011. He served as president of Cal State East Bay since 2006. He came to East Cal State Bay from Cal State Northridge, where he served as Vice President for Administration and Finance and Chief Financial Officer from 2000 to 2006, and also served a tenured Professor of Engineering Management. Previously, he served as Associate Vice President for Administration at San Jose, Director of Utilities and Engineering Services, Director of Technical Services, and Staff Engineer at University of Cincinnati, Ohio. In addition, Dr. Keone served as an engineer on a variety of projects in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from American University of Beirut. This is the good part. He holds 4 degrees from the University of Cincinnati, a Master of Science in Nuclear Engineering, a Master of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering, an MBA, and a PhD in Electrical Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Keone. Next, I'd like to introduce Danny Flanagan. He's the Vice President. He's the Vice President of Business and Financial Affairs and Treasurer at Spelman College. His tenure spans 40 years. He currently serves on several boards: Tuition, the Padilla School, and the Children's School. Past board memberships include Leadership Atlanta, the Common Fund, Northwest Georgia Council of Girl Scouts, Georgia Center for Children, and the National Association of College and University Business Offices. He holds a BA in Business Administration from Clark College and an MBA in Finance and Management from Emory University. He also attended the London School of Business. Welcome, Dan. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Steve Crow. He's the Associate Vice President of Campus Planning and Facilities Management at the University of Texas in Austin. Steve has responsibility for utility operations, campus construction, building grounds and maintenance, custodial operations, campus planning, and information technology. The operating units in his portfolio have a combined annual budget of $140 million. Major recent accomplishments include the implementation of facility management software, establishment of a campus-wide condition assessment effort, and the completion of a $150 million utility infrastructure upgrade. Steve is an active member of both APPA and IDEA and served on the APPA Center for Facilities Research Committee that developed Buildings, the Gifts That Keep on Taking. He teaches at APPA Institute for Facility Management, is an adjunct faculty member at the UT Austin Higher Education Administration Program, and serves on the Austin Independent School District Bond Oversight Committee. Welcome, Steve. Next, I'd like to introduce Terry Bump. Terry is the Vice President of University Relations and Student Development for American Campus Communities. It's the first publicly traded student housing real estate investment trust. Terry presents nationally on university trends and issues and has delivered educational sessions at most of our KEMA organizations, including this week at NACUBO. She currently serves on the faculty for KEMA's Women's Leadership Institute and NACUBO's Chief Business Officer Institute. Prior to joining America Campus Communities in 1991, Terry served Boston University, Oberlin College, University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, Texas Southern University, Alfred University, and SUNY Oswego in student affairs. Terry received her bachelor's degree in sociology from SUNY Oswego and her master's in college student development from Alfred University. Welcome, Terry. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you, Siemens. I'm going to tell you how we're going to play today. Is everybody ready? Yes. We're going to talk innovation, we're going to talk learning, and we're going to talk technology. So buckle up. You ready? Let's go. What I'd like you to do is please sit up straight. And raise your right hand as high as you can. Higher. Without leaving your seat, can you go higher? Well, if you could go a little bit higher, you could save the life of the person you love the most in the whole world. Can anybody go higher? Look at all of you. Thank you. We don't give our best effort the first time, but in education now, the rubber has hit the road, and we have to give our best effort from now on. So we're going to have to reach the high the first time.
Our national debt is $10 trillion.
We have the highest child poverty rate in the developed world.
Our water is contaminated.
Half of us will get cancer.
Our educational system is failing.
And we're the first generation in American history
to inherit a nation
in decline.
They call us the millennials.
But you can call us Generation We.
In 2016, the youngest of us will reach voting age,
making us the largest generational voting bloc
in the country.
And once unified, we can control America's political landscape.
We must vote in unprecedented numbers
and exert our political power
to create a just
and sustainable world.
Please visit our website,
genwe.org.
It is the beginning of a nationwide movement to restore our future,
save our nation,
and preserve our planet.
We're going to make history.
Will you join us?
Will you join us?
Will you join them? Because they're taking over. They're the largest group, the largest generation to date. They are less politically polarized. They're global and green and interested in what's happening all over the world. They're more diverse than ever. 1 out of every 3 is not Caucasian. They're more educated. They're more technically savvy. They're mobile. They can multitask like none before. Have you seen that? All that multitasking, yes.
I stand before you today to apologize. The system has failed you. I have failed you. I have failed to help you share your talent with the world when the world needs talent more than ever, yet it's being wasted every day by an educational system steeped in tradition and old ideas. Well, it's time for a new tradition. It's time to realize talent isn't just in schools like this one, it's everywhere. It's time to use technology to rewrite the rules of education. To learn how you learn so we can teach you better. It's time a university adapted to you rather than you adapting to it. It's time for a different kind of university. It's your time.
It's time to adapt, isn't it, everyone? Time to make some changes, to keep all of the good and adapt to what we have. We have to come together with both online learning and in solid classrooms. So we have to make nice with both parts. The Chronicle of Higher Education dropped an article earlier this year that came out of Microsoft, and it spoke vividly about the potential of online learning in combination with our brick and mortar structures. And that's what we're going to see, and that's what our students are asking for. Thinking doesn't require time in the seat anymore. Time in the chair doesn't mean that you've actually learned something. They're looking at outcomes and engagement to measure learning. So 3 things, 3 of our biggest challenges. What are they going to be from the student perspective? Cost. How many of you are putting people in college right now, paying for it? So finding the money and making this technology worthwhile so that when students graduate, there is an outcome. Speed. The next big thing. It's not around the corner, it's in front of us. It changes so rapidly and so quickly that we can't keep pace sometimes. So I think the approach needs to be looking at it as an evolution as opposed to an end product. And this is something you know better than most, using the right tool for the right job. We're going to have to evaluate these innovative technologies and really recognize and choose Choose specifically. And your place at the table is essential because you give context and understanding of what works in your buildings, on your campuses, in the classrooms. So you can best prepare to give that information at the president's table. One thing I know for sure is this generation loves their technology, and that's how they identify. The one thing they cannot do without is their technology, and that's not going to change. So how can we adapt to serve them and get them through the educational process where they learn, matriculate, and graduate? So reach up and think about the cloud, because that's where we're going next. Are you ready for the cloud? Okay. I'd like to call to the podium our next speaker, and that would be Mo.
Thank you, Terry, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure for me to come to APPA events. For me, APPA is always home, and it's a place that I owe so much of my professional success to APPA. So it's a pleasure to be back at APPA. I think Terry really set up a great framework in terms of what has really happened for technology and where things are going. But let's look at some basic elements in terms, if we look at the last 100 years or so and how our economy has really moved and how we have become the kind of economic giant in the world. And there are three key events that has really done that. First, the Morrill Act. Second, the GI Bill. And third, the post-Sputnik activity on education. According to Alan Greenspan, if you look at our gross domestic product for the last 50 years, more than half of it is due to our enhancements in technology. So as part of that, when we can see that technology has always played a key role, especially in the last half a century, as far as our economic well-being, as far as our national security and our strategic position in the world. So currently, if you look at what is really happening in technology, just look at some of the large companies right now, companies that did not even exist a few years ago. Facebook, it's valued to be over $100 billion. Groupon, $30 billion. Many other companies, Twitter, $8 billion. LinkedIn, also $8 billion. Zynga, $20 billion. And the other interesting part is that if you take all of those 5 companies and you put all of their employees, you can fit it in Madison Square Garden, 20,000 seats, and still there'll be room. That tells you about how companies have really changed. Look at Zynga, for instance. Every day, over 2 billion minutes are played in Zynga all over the world. So that kind of gives you a sense about how our technologies have really changed. About a year or so, the amount of information that is generated, every 11 hours it will be doubled, starting 2012. Which means that, let's say, when you go home on a weekend, on a Friday, by the time you come back on a Monday, the amount of information, data in the world has quadrupled from when you left it on Friday. When you go out for vacation for a week, that has increased by over 32 times. So that really shows that we are really in a very different kind of environment than we have been in the past. Terry mentioned about the whole aspect of multitasking. But also as part of that multitasking, we also look at it almost in a different way because as part of it, that has created an attention span problem, an attention problem, because basically as we are multitasking, aren't we attention splitting? So really the idea of all of the stimulus that all of the millennials have, how can we really make sure that they can really spend enough time on any topic? Because unlike the times that all of us were going to school, right now the students have the ability for pushing that channel and going to the different channels. So can we really have adequate elements that the students would still remain engaged? And that really is part of what we really run into. So basically, the dichotomy that we see, this abundance of information has really given us a paucity of attention. So how can, as part of it, and when you look at our learning system, how can we really stimulate students so they can remain engaged and become part of the learning experience? Because traditionally, the way that we have really looked at learning, our universities, mentally, we have looked at it very much like When you take your car, when there is no gas, you take it to a gas station, you fill it in, and off you go. We have looked at education system very similarly, that a student comes allegedly with an empty mind, and we fill it with so much of history classes, English classes, math, so on and so forth, and then if you have so many credits and so many seat time, you have graduated. Now, all of us know that's flawed, the way that we have to look at education, and also specifically learning. We have to look at learning in terms of critical thinking, in terms of being able to solve complex problems, in terms of being able to work in teams, and have the communication skills, and how we can bring all of this as part of a metacognition and be able to connect things together, regardless of where students really learn. Now, if you look at the traditional classrooms, and the way that we have run our universities, going back to the days of Capella and the University of Bologna and Heidelberg and whatever for the last 300 plus years, that basically has been the traditional way. We have somebody lecturing, you have a locked classroom, similar to what we have right now. That basically is how we have tried to do it. I've always tell some of our faculty that the Socratean method that we have tried, if Socrates was alive today with all of the technologies, would he really run their classes the way we are running, and more than likely not. So we say, well, yes, the classrooms that we have from this one, which is basically the turn of the century till today, yes, things look different. We have PowerPoint as and one person I think really gave a good sense of the magic of PowerPoint. This I think really gives us a good dramatic expression of what PowerPoint has really become. But is that how we really use technology to really engage students as part of the learning process? So if we really look at learning, how learning really has become local, global, and mobile, how really we look at elements of science, technology, engineering, and math as part of the STEM skills, not necessarily STEM disciplines that everybody has to major in those areas, but how technological fluency is really becoming an important, regardless of what we study. But as part of that one, the elements that would really make a difference for us is elements of imagination, joyfulness, and how education has to be social and contextual, because that's the part that we have lost. We have been doing a good job of teaching students in terms of analytical abilities, but how much do we really try to make sure that students get the capabilities in terms of synthesizing information? So that's why elements like gaming, elements like simulations and others are really becoming, and design really becomes a key, because in design and games and whatever, you're trying to bring knowledge bases from all of the different sources, regardless of where we have really learned that information. Which really led us to a new model for education, which is, we've called it as open learning ecosystem. And there is a paper that will be also part of the proceedings that you'll have with a colleague and I co-authored on this one. And also there's going to be a website, some information in about 3 weeks with getideas.org that you can look through that one. That's going to be broadcasted in over 150 countries on what open learning means. And what we have tried to define in terms of open learning ecosystem, that first of all, we have to look at more innovative ways of teaching and learning and really get out of that word teaching, but also be able to accommodate a broader mixture of learning providers. In some way, if you look at higher education, we're very much in terms of where TVs and broadcasting was back in the 1950s. If you go back to 1950s, what was happening with local TV stations? They were producing most of their programs, and they were broadcasting most of their programs. Now, if you look at today, how much of the producing local TV stations do today? Except for the local weather and traffic report, do they do much more? But how about universities? Should all universities, should every faculty member produce their lecture and deliver it and be part of the learning? Or should we look at the libraries, we look at public broadcasting, many of the corporations, many of the theaters and others to be part of that very rich mixture of the learning, because especially when our companies, they have many times for the latest information versus what we have. How can we really look at a way that formal and informal education, the barrier that we have and the walls that we have would really disappear, and really use technology in a very transparent way. Why we try to make technologies this something so new and so different? To me, technology of the past is utility of today, and technology of today is utility of tomorrow. There isn't anything magical about technology. The only difference that makes it hard for us is that for millennials, they're all digital natives, and us as digital immigrants, we have that difficulty. But how many of us look at electricity as technology? It's there, but I'm sure in the 1910s and 20s, that was looked at as, wow, the new technology and how life was really changing. But more importantly, how knowledge and learning really becomes social, contextual, and continuous. So it's not something that we only do that while we're in college. So as part of that one, this is basically a very, and the paper talks about it more, but as you can see, the education really becomes a cradle to career, and all of the information being through the cloud. There is no break in terms of pre-K, K-12, community college, and higher education beyond. Because those who go to college today, by the time they graduate, they're going to go about 10 job changes by the time they are 40. So learning has to become an ongoing part of what they need to experience. So that's why partnering and re-engineering the way that we do learning is very important. So some of the key future trends that we see, I already talked about. Global education is becoming green, global, and mobile. Campuses has to become cool places. Campuses has to be places which really attract students, that learning will be very in an open environment, in a very collaborative way. We have to get rid of the classroom model. At best, classrooms are 30% effective. The question that I raise is that many of us flew coming here. How many of you would like to fly back knowing that pilot only went to lectures learning how to fly? So that kind of gives you a sense of how effective just lecture by itself is. What do we mean libraries when we look at we're in a digital age? How many books are really there? Or bookstores? Aren't they becoming more learning commons? And also, to what extent we get more into self-paced studios where students can collaborate all across the globe. So these are some mock-ups of some of the possible types of classrooms that we're seeing. As also Terry talked about, different furnitures, how they can move and students can walk around. Very few different models that you can see. These are some from the MIT, some and a few other ones from two other universities on some of the new labs. But also some of these could be students that they are on site, and some of them could be all over the world. If you look at Boeing 787, that was made with teams from 18 different time zones, hoping that all of the pieces fit together and the plane will fly. That basically is the environment that our graduates need to work in. So not only we don't have to have all of the pieces of equipment in our campuses. Many of them could be in national labs, they could be in corporations, and people will be able to emulate that one. How many times a student has to dissect a frog? I mean, if you have done it once in high schools, couldn't they do that one in the future, do all of that electronically? So that, is one simple thing, but there are many of those kind of, does every campus need a very expensive electronic microscope, for instance? But if you have it in one place, how it could really be time shared. So, I mean, all of this could fit. This is a, possible mock-up of how these different elements like Collaboratoria, Imagineria, and these kind of labs fit in a possible type of building. As part of that, the key infrastructure issues that we have is the need for higher speed broadband. The reliability of our systems on a 24/7 becomes more important. The need for visualization labs become very important, because basically I see that to be a major need in our libraries or the new kind of learning commons, and the integration of our building systems. And in a way, I think we will not really see any dumb sensors. I think all of the sensors that we see in our buildings will be smart. All of that done through cloud systems. Our information system becoming part of, and on campus becoming part of augmented reality, as well as most of our communication be done through the cloud. So with that, why don't I stop and let us continue then.
Thank you. Thank you, Mo. And now I'd like to invite Danny to the podium.
I guess I should take your advice and make sure that I put a solid podium in front of me in case I drop my papers. Well, good morning again. It's so good to see you all. I was very excited about coming to this conference, given that I was told who I was going to be on the panel with for president. Terry, I've known for a while, and I know she's absolutely great. Then I have one of you here, and I'm going, okay. So they're going to have a numbers guy. So I'm going to approach my presentation as if I were having a conversation with you as the director of physical plan or vice president for facilities management. But again, my name is Danny Flanagan, and I come from Spelman College here in Atlanta, Georgia. Let me just tell you a little bit about Spelman. Free advertisement for my president for the college. We are a liberal arts college for women. We're a historic campus with 45 acres dating back to 1881. We have an enrollment of about 2,050 young ladies that yield from probably about 47 states and 16 international countries. We have on-campus availability of 1,390 students, and we're always full, so we are truly a residential college campus under the Carnegie classification. Our budget is approximately $100 million, and I'm sorry, Steve, that you have more money than I do. We have a budget value of approximately $500 million, and we have an endowment of approximately $325 million. Now, Terry and Mo started out, and I'm glad you used the airplane phraseology. Terry started out at 35,000 feet. Mo came in behind her in his second plane, traveling at about 34,000 feet. He dropped down to 30. So here I am, just the inexperienced pilot, and I'm going to drop down to 20,000 feet. And then I'm going to take it down to 10, and then Steve is going to come behind me and land this baby. So just hold on, and let's see what we do. The challenge for all of us is that we must create flexible living and learning spaces within static structures, because many of us have these old buildings on campus, in an environment saddled with constant change in technology, learning styles, and teaching techniques. Although each college or university is unique in its size, the challenge is not the variable, only its magnitude. So let's talk about how students are going to learn through technology. Students are going to learn through technology almost exclusively going forward. Students will travel with their professors using their iPods and broadcasts and iPhones and laptops. Students will be performing research tasks and reading assignments via the internet and ebooks. Students will take notes on lecturers on laptops as opposed to on paper. Students will engage in online testing. Enrollment in courses will continue to increase, enrollment in online courses. Students will learn in small groups rather than the lecture-based learning that we all know today. Tomorrow's students live through technology almost exclusively. All of us believe in face-to-face. These kids coming up don't have that process. Interpersonal relationships will exist primarily online. Facebook and social media sites are primary forms of communications that they will engage in, and the lines between learning and living will become increasingly blurred. So, how do we meet these challenges of this next generation? Well, I say to you as physical facilities directors, be flexible in your thinking and in your building. Embrace the holistic value and architecture of older facilities on the exterior while accommodating for demolition and reconfiguration of the interiors. And I'm talking about wall and fenestrations. And just in case you think I don't know what fenestration is, that's windows and the roof. Be open to repurposing spaces. We can't get caught up in our old ways. Avoid exterior bearing walls to accommodate case horizontal expansion, because vertical expansion on our campuses is very expensive. Circulation systems must become a design exercise with a very high level of understanding of the value and not just the place in the hallway or in the staircase. Now, this is music to your ears. You have to consider all the sustainable initiatives as we go forward. Such things as integration of recycling, daylight harvesting, and light sensors. Daylight is very important to these kids that are coming behind us. Make sure that you have lead education prompts throughout the facilities. Got to design energy efficient MEP systems. And of course, we want to make sure that we always pick sustainable materials as we do these buildings. So I have chosen, as we land this plane at 10,000, to share with you 3 case studies that we think about as we go forward, similar to some of the things that Mo said. First of all, I'm going to use the science building as a case study. The science building of the future embraces the needs of the next generation and its faculty and staff through the creation of user-friendly spaces which accommodate changing learning styles and rapidly evolving technology. When we do science buildings in the future, here is what some of the functional adjacencies should look like in this circle. First, the outer circle, we think, are all the labs and all the classrooms. Lots of exposure to the sun, lots of inviting nature into the classroom, lots of movement among the students. The second interior core, second step of that cluster is the interior core for the faculty offices and for student meeting spaces. That should facilitate discussion, it should facilitate more movement among faculty, it should facilitate learning. And the third piece is the core, which is the common areas. And out here, we want students to be able to gather lots of sunlight again, lots of technology, and there will be lots of interdisciplinary learning going on because you have students from all categories of the sciences coming together. So again, the science building is see-through, it's filled with daylight, it promotes interdisciplinary study, integrates with nature. The science building of the future includes teaching and research clusters. That was the second core that we showed you. Clusters are three-dimensional. The cluster components also include offices, which are arranged to promote interaction between faculty members and faculty and students. There's classrooms with technology systems. Classrooms will have to feature things like smart boards, projection screens, cameras for broadcast, and wireless internet connections. Classrooms will be served by discrete AV and equipment rooms for anytime access. We got to offer more distance learning technologies. And believe me or not, smaller colleges and universities will start having to use this technology. And seating and furniture arrangements must be loose to promote discussion and learning. You got to be movable. There will be labs in these clusters. There's going to be support spaces that we talked about earlier, meeting and conference rooms, dynamic central commons, etc. How do we overcome some of these challenges? Well, I'm stepping out of my zone. Some of us, and I know you're quite familiar with building information modeling software packages. So you can use that to integrate all building systems, including cost estimation. Utilities may have to be relocated in the older buildings. New furniture, again, must be mobile. We can use a central span in the design of laboratory buildings. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. To my left is the old traditional science building. You have a double-loaded corridor, and you have labs on the north of that corridor, and you have labs on the south of that corridor. Let's make the transition to what we think the building of the future should look like. The lab should be in the center, in the core, backed up to each other so that you can easily change the mechanical, water systems, electrical systems, and et cetera. And you put the single-loaded corridors on each side of this building so that that is where circulation takes place. Just an example. The second one is the library of the future. The library of the past, the ones that we were accustomed to when we were in college, was a facility built primarily for research. However, the library of the next generation must serve a new purpose. Students will use the library for group study and instruction, as research is now going to be accomplished online. So libraries are adapting to the changing ways in which students learn and study by moving books to the basement, which creates more space for group study. Group study rooms are being equipped with high-definition monitors for work on multimedia assignments. Wall coverings are now functioning as dry erase boards. You got to have space for exhibits and these cafes. You got to have wireless capability. You must have instruction rooms in the library, and you need to have a space dedicated to IT support on site to repair and fix these kids' technology. Let's move to the third study, which is the final one. I may be running out of time. Am I okay? This is the dormitory of the future. Now, the dormitory of the future will allow for spatial arrangements which are flexible. It will blur boundaries and encourage spontaneous group learning and activity needed to support innovative thought processes and innovations. Now, one of the things that I did trying to research this topic was to find something that was being done by a Boston architect, and I'm giving him free advertisement, he or him or her, Jonathan Levi Architects out of Boston, Massachusetts. Their concept of a flexible dorm is built on an old tool modular construction process. Facility, therefore, built on a modular process is readily alterable with components capable of shifting, for an example, from undergraduate to graduate study, dwellings from housing to academic spaces, to conferencing spaces to student lives. For any given semester, the dorm setup can reflect a broad type of units. We can go from single rooms to double rooms to quads, etc. It will enable variable programming over shared common zones, such as private living, kitchen, private dining, private conference, public lounges, public dining, group study, or recreation space. The adaptability of the flex dorm process allows university planners to respond to changing long-term demographics and educational priorities of their institution. This is totally different than what we are accustomed to today. So building construction is intended to incorporate smart wall projection, interlock windows to present cooling loss, which is so important to all of us, stacked ventilation chases, semi-conditioned public spaces, and of course we want to have green roofs and courtyard stormwater runoff. Generally, varying options for retrofitting and rebuilding exist for institutions striving to ensure the facilities continue to serve the needs of their ever-changing population. With careful planning, my colleagues, and with careful planning and mindsets, centered around the ability to create fluid and flexible spaces, institutions will be equipped to serve the next generation of students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. And Steve is up next. Please welcome him.
Well, that was an impressive discussion of facilities from a chief business officer that doesn't know much about them. Well, I'm pleased to be here today. I was very excited about being asked to participate in this session, mostly because it was one that I just started thinking about and didn't know a lot about. So in the process of getting ready to tell you what I know, I had to learn a little bit myself. As both Mo and Danny have said, we're going in a new direction in how we provide learning opportunities on campus. The didactic teaching model, I don't know how many of you sat in lecture halls like this, but I have many memories, not necessarily fond of this kind of experience. And we're going to a picture that you've seen already from both the previous presenters, to a more interactive learning approach. And so what I thought about was, what does that mean for us as facilities people? What kind of challenges are we going to face in terms of either building new space or converting existing space? And I really began focusing on converting existing space for several reasons. This problem generally gets taken care of in the new construction process. If you have a good thinker like Danny, he's going to drive the programming and the design process to produce these kind of spaces. But converting existing space, I think, is going to be a challenge, and it's going to be important as we make our campuses more sustainable and make better and future use of our existing facilities. I know on my campus there's a lot of attention being given to LEED construction and all the things that go along with that, but that'll end up being 5 or 10% of our total inventory in the next few years. The bulk is what we already have and making better use of that, not only from an energy and perspective, but also converting it to meet the needs of research and teaching is going to be critical. And so I think that's the challenge that I've tried to focus on here. But why are we going there? Why is this happening? I think in understanding how we make it better, we need to not forget how we arrived at the place we're at. The inventor of the system deserves to be ranked among the best contributors of learning and science, if not the greatest benefactors of mankind. High praise indeed. What's it all about? The invention of the blackboard in 1841. So that kind of gives you a sense of not only the technology that we're trying to overcome, but the culture itself. And I think Mo's point about a societally contextual learning environment is really important. And getting there means we've got to overcome this 1841 technology that we've been dealing with. Now, I realize we have whiteboards and smart whiteboards that were invented after 1841, but the basic pedagogical style approach has been based on that same technology since that period of time. There's some philosophical reasons for doing what we're doing. Sophocles has a good reason. I think Carl Erickson is probably the one most in tune with what's happening with our students right now. Students learn what they care about and remember what they understand. And I think that's really where our faculty are focusing now, is getting students to learn what they care about and to care about what they learn. But this process of engaging the mind is really, really important as we think about creating new types of space and helping our faculty understand what that means. So Mo talked very eloquently about the changing needs of society and why we're going there. Technology is both a driver and an enabler. I think Carl Erickson talked in, I think 1981 about this issue. Sophocles even earlier than that. So why now are we seeing this kind of tipping point that we're at? Well, I think technology is the driver there. We have a third of Americans on a smartphone now. The majority of web traffic will be generated by mobile technology in 2015. 2015, I mean, that's like tomorrow. And mobile internet use will increase 56 times. Users will increase 56 times to 788 million people worldwide by 2015. Again, tomorrow. I mean, by the time we get to 2015, almost everybody is going to have some type of mobile device. And that's got big implications not only for our teaching environment, but also for our workplace. And I'll try and talk about that a little bit as well as we go through this. But I think as we think about the teaching environment, as facilities professionals, we cannot neglect thinking about what that means from two perspectives. What kinds of employees are we going to be receiving from this educational environment? If I've learned one way, then I'm very comfortable standing up here and talking to all of you because this is an approach to learning that I've been indoctrinated with. But 20 years from now, the person who would be standing up here in front of you would have learned in an entirely different type of environment. So that means a lot about how we manage people and how we continue to train our people as well. So this impact just is not in the classroom. It's going to ripple through our organizations in a variety of ways. There are some facility issues, and so I'm going to try and land the airplane. Now, there are some people in here who know me, and they would say that my flying is by the seat of the pants. So I would echo Terry's admonition, buckle up. It could be a bumpy landing. We'll just see how successful we are here. Space. Space is the final frontier. Space is the cost that drives everything we do. Talk all you want about utilities, you can talk all you want about other things, but from our end, the more space you consume, the more money it costs. And these types of interactive learning environments are going to be at least twice the area per student station. And I'll give you some examples of that. Acoustics. Not just the sound, but with Wi-Fi and broadband and all those things, we have to be concerned about all kinds of acoustics. We're building our lead buildings to be very resistant to light waves. Well, light waves aren't the only frequency that has to pass through those buildings. And we're discovering on our campus that our lead buildings are so good that you can barely get cell phone reception in them. And it's looking like the last estimate I heard just before I came here, somewhere in the range, it's not a huge cost, but about $1 a square foot to put additional reception in our lead buildings so that they'll perform like our clients want them to. But that's an additional $1 a square foot. And now that the building's built, we're going to be retrofitting it to do that. We have about 75% of our campus covered with Wi-Fi coverage. But what does that mean? That means if this room in our campus was about a third full, you'd get reasonable connectivity. We don't have a 200-person classroom that has 100% connectivity. And when we do put 200 people in a 200-person classroom and they all bring out their mobile devices, it pretty much sucks all the connectivity out of every other room in that building. So a lot of discussion on our campus about how do we address this issue. Do we insulate certain spaces and provide a high level of Wi-Fi infrastructure there, or do we boost up the entire building? It's causing our IT people, and it's interesting on my campus to see this transition. I've been talking about IT as an infrastructure for a long time and have been almost burned at the stake as a heretic over that issue. But now they're really starting to get a grasp of this utility issue that they're dealing with. Just like I have problems making sure that there's enough chilled water to cool the building, they've now got to make sure that there's enough bandwidth to do all the things that faculty want to do. So this concept is entering into their world, and it's all for the better. We've talked about flexibility. We've talked about adaptability. Everybody wants Wi-Fi because it's a lot easier. There is no wireless power, so we're raising floors just so we can be flexible, not because you need the wiring, but because you need the power. And you're going to want to move things around. And you want it to be safe. And we start putting a lot of people in different kinds of spaces, and there's all these codes and fire and life safety things. These are the things that we're going to start educating our faculty about as they begin thinking about creating these new and very important interactive learning spaces. So I tasked a couple of my folks to using some of the models that have been proposed for various types of MIT and other places to what does that look like? So we've taken a couple of A room. On the right is a scale-up of a prototype classroom that we're building and will be effective this summer based on what the faculty wants to do. So you see about 196 seats on the right. On the left is, and that's about 25 square feet of student station. Now that's more than a classroom of 196 seats. You know, we're looking at what, 15 to 19 ASF for a student station for that kind of space. So we're already bumping the one on the right up some. But to really get to the kind of space that you need for this interactive learning approach, you're looking at somewhere around 33 square feet a student station. That's going from 196 seats to 144 seats. That's a big deal. Our faculty aren't thinking about this now. They've got a room of 50 at about 22 ASF per square feet, and they think they can just treble that size without any problem. That's not going to happen. So this is sort of good news, bad news. It's going to work. It's just not going to fill as many seats as you'd like it to. I asked the question, well, how many spaces do we have that we could do this in? And so we picked out a fairly random representative group of our buildings. That's about 1.5 million square feet of gross square feet of space. And out of that, we get 12 classrooms. Now, that's space that is existing classrooms that could be modified with very little cost. It does include rooms that have columns, but it doesn't include anything that would require major construction. So we've left out some of the smaller auditoriums. Tiered auditoriums are going to be a problem if they tier down, because you're going to fill in the exits if you fill them up. So we've got some auditoriums that tier up, and we could use those potentially. We didn't include those, and we didn't include some other kinds of space. This was just a very quick look at the easy options. But what it told me was we don't have a lot of easy options. That means our design, our evaluation processes are going to be challenging, and we're going to be really forced to be creative in how we address these kinds of issues as we go forward. It's not just for classrooms, as I mentioned. Now, this happens to be an example of a hub space, kind of like what Mo proposed, or for faculty, but it also serves as an example for us as to what kind of space we may need to be thinking about in our offices, our administrative spaces, as we move into working with a workforce that has a more collaborative learning set, that they don't necessarily want to be in an office. They want to be in an environment like the one they learned in. So I think that we need to begin considering how we'll adapt our office space to meet these new kinds of employee desires and needs, to make our workplace socially contextual. I also think that Mo's point about cradle to grave or cradle to career learning is really important. That's why APPA exists, but we have to think about extending that into our own organizations. Our employees are going to want to be part of organizations that recognize that continuous learning process and allow them to engage in it over time. Let me just talk about a few resources. Scale Up is a kind of a national consortium of institutions that are involved in this. There's about 80 institutions on that list. Now, my campus is talking about this quite a bit, and they're not on that yet. I noticed that many of your campuses, or some of your campuses, are on the list. If you haven't heard about this on your campus, I would go to this place and see if you have faculty who are talking about this, because I have faculty who are talking about this, and I'm trying to catch up. And it's tough, as you know, to catch up to faculty. So inform yourself about this issue. EduCause has a number of resources about this in their Technology Enhanced Classroom section. One of those resources is a case study in master planning the learning landscape at the University of Buffalo. I found that to be very, very useful. It really provides a very good view, kind of from a campus level, of what Danny was talking about. Student learning space, faculty learning space, very, very helpful. And then finally, 2 excellent videos. The first one, the student perspective, was done by a class at the University of Kansas about their dissatisfaction with the first slide that we showed, about learning in that kind of environment. Interestingly, the video starts off with the fact that the presentation was created by 200 students, and there were 336 edits to the document as it was being created. So gives you an idea of how students can collaborate and learn on these things. So why are we going there from the student perspective? That is great. And then the University of Minnesota did a great video, and they're on the Scale Up website, about the interactive learning environment that they have there. Why are we leaving it, and what is the excitement about being there is really in these 2 videos. So I encourage you to take a look at those. So I hope I've successfully gotten us pretty close to the ground. And it's been a great pleasure to be here. It's been a lot of fun learning about this, and I I wish you all the best in this new adventure on our campuses. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now we're going to go to questions. So there should be some microphones. Please join us if you have comments, questions at the microphones. Anyone? Anyone? I can't see. Excellent.
My experience is actually the employees that are most expensive across the university like space. The point I took here is that your comment about labs and for us these interactive spaces where students work together that require intensive staff support. Those spaces require staff to be closely associated with them to maximize the value of that staffing time. That's by and large the most expensive cost. So what we found is creating new spaces that actually address the staffing need with the classroom needs, because it is completely changing. And you do have to make those spaces available 24 hours a day where you didn't. So it's really important that space drive, that staffing connection with those resources.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone want to comment to it? Okay. We do have some other questions that we can throw out there. Let's start first with, how many of you are familiar with the cloud concept? Just coming from Nakubo, that was the most heavily, they were standing room only in all of the sessions on the cloud. So I want to just throw out one question about it. Cloud computing and data being more portable. How realistic and practical is that for educational institutions? Mo, can you take that?
Well, first of all, the whole the concept of cloud as a concept was developed or coined, or the phrase was coined by the marketers rather than engineers. So that's why they, in order to fuzz it, there isn't anything magical about clouds. Basically, you're talking about a series of servers connected together in one location. So as an entity that you want to buy them or you have a need, you can ask for those services on a modular level. That basically is the whole issue. I think in many of our campuses, we have many campuses who have their servers all over the place. They have tried to consolidate those ones, and then they have seen how they could virtualize that one with their system or with a commercial entity. In my prior campus that I was, we had over 100 servers. In about a year or so, we were able to emulate that, consolidate that one to 3 virtualized servers, and now all of that has been through a commercial server. In my current institution, basically, in the past, if somebody wanted to have a server, of course, they had to make an order to buy a server, put the power system, put the emergency backup and all of that, which, as you know, it takes such a long period of time, and also the cost. But now, basically, somebody can make an order, and within an hour or so, they can emulate a virtual blade for that particular server, and they are all in business. Whenever they don't no longer need it, that could be decommissioned in that speed. So it's the speed, cost, and also, more importantly, the aspect of data security. Because when you have your own individual servers, that's another possibility for hacking, and so you need all of that overhead for the security and all of that. But this way, when it's done through entities that they have all of that available, it will become much easier and much simpler. So that basically is the whole issue of clouds. One simple way that, for me, the analogy is if we look at our electrical system, so we can say we get our electricity from the cloud because we have a few power stations that provide it for all of us, and we use as much as we need. So to me, it's the same analogy as we look at data system and data servers.
Thank you. Other questions? Comments? Yes. Yes, sir.
Just a question about cleaning for health and what's happening to our indoor environmental quality and our indoor air quality. I'm interested to hear a panel any thoughts and discussions of what we're doing together to clean up our indoor environmental quality.
Gentlemen?
I'll make a comment, and maybe my colleague
I can respond to that. The question was about cleaning for health and indoor, kind of indoor air quality. I think one of the issues about that is that I think indoor air quality begins at a lot of places. One is the materials that we put in the rooms and the amount of time that we allow buildings to ventilate after we install new equipment, so that we're beginning with a positive environment. And then cleaning with various types of materials that are not adding to a negative environment. I just had an interesting situation about the indoor environment. My vice president had an odd odor in her office, and that's never a good thing. And I found out about it on Thursday after it had been existing for several days, and environmental health and safety had been in there, and all these things, people have been looking at it. And I walked through her office and I noticed a refrigerator, a small office refrigerator. And I said, "Did anybody ask you about this?" And she said, "Oh no, that can't be a problem because it's an electric refrigerator. Electric refrigerators, those refrigerators don't have Freon." I said, "Pat, every refrigerator has Freon." I said, "Why don't we take the refrigerator out and see if that helps the problem?" And sure enough, it did. Don't know quite what was wrong with the refrigerator, but that solved the problem. The moral of that story is we can do a whole lot in our from our perspective to make indoor air quality good, but we also have to have the assistance of our clients. Printers, computers, there's a lot of things that get installed in offices and often in enclosed spaces that off gas or produce negative elements to our indoor air quality that we can't control. So I think part of this is a general education for the entire campus about what is good indoor air quality and what kinds of things contribute to that. What we're doing to address that issue over the long term, but then how they can assist us with that by taking care of it. It's interesting, from my background would tell me that almost every problem like that, insects, odors, whatever, is an occupant-related problem that we're asked to come in and help resolve. So I think a lot of what happens on campus is we can direct people in the right way and help them make good choices, but it's a partnership in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to add?
Just very quickly, what Steve talked about. As I alluded in my presentation, one of the things that we're going to see more and more is more smart systems and smart sensors. So I think traditionally in our designs, engineers were over-designing in terms of air exchanges, but now as through energy conservations, as we are trying to reduce most of that one, now as we have more sensors, whether it's for CO2 or volatile organic compounds or others, we'll be able to measure those ones and be able to optimize the amount of ventilation also. So I think that combination of sensors as well as I think Steve's point is a very important one, that many times the solution to some of these problems are not something exotic. It's something that is right in front of us. And if we go back to the very basics, we can resolve a lot of those issues.
Thank you. Okay.
Does it work? Probably not.
It should.
Okay. My question is for Mo. We're just getting ready to cut the ribbon on a LEED certified building.
Yeah.
Gorgeous building, green roof, all the fancy stuff you need for HVAC, sensors, reused material, you name it.
Yeah.
But when we tried to design it to incorporate the best pedagogy, use of pedagogy, of course, the faculty said, hold it. We want all the rooms with the window views. We don't want natural light, we had to incorporate all the classrooms inside the center of the core, no light into the interior, because we have a beautiful mountain environment. They wanted all the views around the outside, right?
Yeah.
So everything we talked about in adaptive design, they wanted the tiered classrooms, this, and that, violates everything we talk about with the new education and pedagogy that we were all talking about. And the funny thing about that is that this is our new College of Education. This is the group that's supposed to be, you read that students benefit best by natural daylight, learning in natural daylight, and cooperative things, and we have all the fixed classrooms and all that other stuff going on. How do you as a president drive your faculty to say, guys, the world is changing. It's not 600 years ago in Cologne, France or whatever.
Oh, well, all right.
How are you going to get them, to sit down with us to say, if you want us to build these buildings, you need to flex a little bit?
Well, first of all, I'm sure you've heard about that comment about, presidents are like grass on a cemetery. They are over a lot of people, but they can't make any of them move. So from that starting there, I think part of it would be is, in the design of any facility, that's where collaboration is so important, and that's why I think in many cases getting the faculty to visit a number of other sites where they've had relatively new buildings and talk to the faculty to see what were some of the benefits and some of the difficulties and challenges that they have to see, and hopefully if you can address those ones. I think especially in education building, not knowing some of the specifics of it, I find, and I totally agree with many of the audience, that I find that one quite strange because they work so much with K through 12. For those areas, you need a lot of flights. You need a lot of flights for as much as you can. Whether that might have been for some particular labs that they wanted to make sure that they can keep people's attention. But my personal bias is that you can keep people's attention by how they are stimulating. They find that information useful, and they find that relevant. Going back to the quote that I think Steve used, that I'll try to paraphrase, that students will try to learn what they care about and remember what they understand. So I think part of that, maybe that must have been part of it, that they wanted to make sure that they can minimize the amount of distractions. But again, I find that one quite unique. Has anybody else run into that where faculty wanted their classrooms to be to all be interior space? Okay, well, any suggestions that you have, or any experience that you have seen with that? But I think, going back, whether it's classroom buildings or any type of facility, it's seeing what has really happened, how you can learn from other people's experience, and make that one a very collaborative process, not only in terms of the design, how it's executed, and how it will be maintained, because because the early process of planning and design takes about a year or 2 or 3, but the use of that building and utilization, operations, and maintenance is another 50-year issue. And unless everybody has been part of it, they'll definitely have difficulties.
Yes, sir.
I had a question on space utilization rates. How is the discussion on space utilization rates playing into the repurposing of existing space on college campuses?
That's a really good question. And in Texas, there are some fairly rigorous standards regarding space utilization that don't really take into account this type of space right now. And one of the things that we've learned from our initial analysis is that we're going to have to work with the provost office, and they're going to have to work with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board to get them to understand that we're moving into a new kind of learning environment that does take more space per student station than we've seen before. We're going to be moving somewhat gradually into this, so I think we have time to implement that educational process. But it is going to be, we're going to move into a number of new paradigms here about how we use space and how we determine whether it's being used effectively. In response to the question about the interior spaces, I think that as the places we're going to find to create these new learning environments in existing buildings are not necessarily going to be the most attractive environments. One example I saw when I was looking at this was, I think it was maybe Emory University filled in a couple of pools, and that's where they built their new interactive learning center. Well, there's no windows in that space, but the students seem to be very excited about the new learning environment. I think we're going to have these dichotomies of how neat it is in the new building and how close to that we can come in renovating existing facilities. But back to your original question, standards regarding space utilization are going to have to be adapted to meet this new approach, this new pedagogy.
Let me just comment with regards to some small colleges that I'm familiar with regards to space utilization. My partner in crime sitting in the audience is Art Frazier, who's the facilities director at Spelman College. And we were coming up on an accreditation process approximately 2 years ago. and decided that we better look at our space utilization processes and understand better where they were, and do benchmarking with some of the other private colleges around the area in the Southern Association. Well, needless to say, we have discovered that at most private colleges, small private colleges, there is no criteria around space utilization. And when we actually go and look at space utilization, I mean, when Art walked in my office with the studies that he and his engineers and all these space planners had done, and I'm going, this is wrong. And he looks at me, and I'm going, you're telling me we are less than 50% utilizing our space? And he said, that's true. So I run off to the provost's office, and I get them all around the table, and they go, well, that's right. You know, faculty just like to teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 until 1 o'clock, and they like to go home on, you know, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So that became, for Art and for me and for our group, that became an issue at the time. Of course, you know, we went to our president. She can't do nothing with the faculty. She's just there. We love her. But as people come, Beverly, I love you. But as people come up to us now for repurposing spaces at our campus, you know, the challenge for Art and for me and my group is not finding the space. The challenge for us is finding the money to get it done. Because we have lots and lots of space. And now that's different from state universities and some of the larger universities, but it's, the challenge again for us is not repurposing space. We can do that all day long. The issue for us is they spend money faster than we can produce it in my office.
Well, in the California State's university systems, the utilization of space very much like the UT system has been very bureaucratic and a very strict system. But I think as we talk about 24/7, a lot of those assumptions and whatever go away. One of the things that the CSU system has tried to go more and more to try to come up with maybe as a gross number on ASF per student, regardless of what space is used for labs and lecture and whatever. So that's one of the models that we're going with. But I think what we have to look at as we look at some of these new technology tools that we have, how much of that space in the way that we have is really needed. You know, for instance, in my prior campus, for most of our engineering and science courses and more for the rest of the area, we're using a technology called lecture capture, which means that 20 minutes after the lecture was given, the students could download that one to their iPods or PCs or iPads or whatever and have all of that for reviews and everything. So part of that was if you have those kind of models as well as looking at our computer labs, we're taking more and more of the computer labs and virtualizing those labs so students through their iPod can have access, or iPads have access to all of the software and all of the programs based on their provisioning if they are taking that particular course or whatever. So I think some of these new technologies also give us some capabilities that can relieve some of the issues. But looking at those standards, given the new technologies, are going to be looked at more closely. But the part that I was trying to make earlier in my presentation that, you know, the whole idea, if we talk about learning, what does learning have to do in a classroom? I mean, the two have nothing in common in a way. But if one of the things that technologies really give us is that it's making all of our closed systems open systems. That's why whether somebody's in the classroom, wherever they are, or in any locations, and anytime they'll still have access to that information and be part of the learning experience. That's going to be more and more part of it, rather than that fixed size of the room and how many people can fit in that room. I think that's going to become less and less of an issue, I believe.
Sir?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that the thinking take a little broader view. You know, we seem to be focused on how do we solve the technology problem in the current structure. And I'd go back to the Kaplan guy who said the structure's failed. It was good for 300 years or whatever, but the structure's wrong. So trying to fix or trying to adapt technology to a structure that no longer fills the right purpose, I think is kind of a mistake. And what we'll end up with, if I'll join Steve in making predictions, is in 50 years, universities will look like GM plants or Kodak, where they're these big old empty buildings monuments to what was happened before. And I think the example I would use, if I were going through today, and I've talked to some of the young folks, you know, if the best geotechnical professor was in one school and the best hydrology was in somewhere else, I want both of them. And I don't want to be stuck with the ones at the university that I've selected. So I think the structure in the future is going to be so much different than what we see today, that we spend a lot of time on this. It's going to be money poured down a drain. So I think there's a broader thought here that has to take place. I'll ask you to.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's why I was talking about that only universities are not going to be the places of learning. That's why we have to take the boundary between informal and formal learning away, and we'll have a group of different, different learning providers, including corporations, foundations, national labs, as well as libraries, public broadcasting, and others. So I think, and what we're going to see more and more, that individuals will have an electronic portfolio that would really cover a lot of that and record what knowledge base people develop. I think one of the things that we see many of our veterans who are coming back to our universities, they're seeing some of that problem because many of them operated very sophisticated equipment in Air Force and other areas, and we want them to come back and take some of those basic courses. While they have already, not only, they've shown all of that competency, how can we really take those competencies and be able to give them, recognize that? Because part of that is, as our colleague was talking about, our whole model is so much on that counting seat time rather than competency level. So as we really change that whole paradigm of competency in terms of what a person knows and what that degree really means, that needs to be really done. My comment has always been, when you go and work for an employer, they don't tell you whether you learned this particular issue in your physics class or chemistry, or where you learned it and how many courses you took in that particular topic. All they know is that, do you know how to solve that problem? So if it is solving the problem in competency, why should we still, isn't it kind of tragic that in the last year and a half, the U.S. Department of Higher Education spent on how to define a credit hour. Now, it's recognized that I know some of the issues because of the financial aid and all of some of the abuses, they had to do that one. But I think unless we really get to the whole concept of the learning and competency base and what the future degrees really mean, we will really will not have the kind of competitive advantage that we've had up to this point.
Anyone else? Well, yes, sir.
Set at the wrong percentage, at a minimal percentage, and end up that why is it so difficult to, I guess, express or get a change organization to say, look, we need to start paying $50,000 or $60,000 on tax and utilize that savings that experience will take a basic for someone just made the wrong choice because they're not skilled enough, they're not talented enough, and raise an institution and compete with the other local organizations that are in the same business because they're paying these top skilled $50,000. And when we do get one, getting to the point where he is making the right choices, then typically he jumps to that organization that can pay $50,000, $60,000.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you said. I think a lot of our HR systems, or whether it's civil service, whether it's union-based, whether even if neither of the two are there, has not been as flexible as they need to. But what you raised has, even the last 30 years that I've been associated with higher education, I've seen that same issue. But what you brought, the issue that you brought is on the point, and we have to look at that one very closely. My colleagues may have more comments on it also.
I would say that up until probably about 11 years ago, we faced similar issues at Spelman and some of the other small colleges in the region. And human resources happens to be a part of my division, and that's where those people were setting salaries and then some of the other stuff. But we built a high-level science center. I mean, that was technology loaded, very sophisticated, and I had to convince, along with our facilities folk, our president, that, and our HR people, that we didn't have the type of talent around to run that place, and on the long haul, it was going to cost us more money. Well, guess what? Nobody believed us. So we had a huge failure that cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it was at that point, people came back and said, well, what do we do? So we said, well, you got to introduce the notion of engineers into this place. You got to go to places like our sponsor, you know, where they have ladies and gentlemen that are qualified to do this stuff, and they ain't cheap. And so we went from spending, you know, $17 or $18 per hour for 1 or 2 people, call it $36, 2,000 hours, 72,000 a year plus fringes, 100,000 bucks. One of those contracts costs you, just for one building, $250,000. But everybody was then happy. The technology is preserved. The technology is now changing, you know, very fastly, and it's being done smoothly. And now all the professors and all those folk in HR and the people who were naysayers says, that's the best thing we ever did. So sometimes it comes through experience.
I think, and let me take my response up just a level. The issue really here is total cost of ownership. And the challenge is getting our institutions to understand that there are trade-offs between the first cost of a building and ongoing costs of buildings. Fortunately, my campus is beginning to understand that, and as they approve new buildings, they're beginning to ask, what's it going to take to maintain this? What's it going to take to heat and cool this building? I think rather than focusing on a particular labor issue, we really need to elevate this to what's the real cost of building this building. It's not just the first cost of putting it into the ground, it's the 30 or 40-year cost, and all those things that go into that, including the technical skills that it will take to maintain that. And the other part is taking some ownership in your own organization for bringing the skill level up with your staff. We've been talking about students who want to learn new things, adapt to new things, collaborate with people. A number of our employees are in that same mode of thinking, that same type of culture towards learning. And bringing these new opportunities to your staff are a way to engage them and keep them. And if you're not losing people because you've trained them well, you're not training your people well.
That's good.
Thank you all very much. If you would join me in thanking Siemens one more time. And visit them in their booth. I'm sure they'll be happy to chat with you. And also thank the panelists, Steve, Danny, and Mo, very much.
Very good.
Well, on behalf of APPA, let me add one more round of thanks. Terry, Mo, Danny, and Steve, you've done a tremendous job here. You've really kicked things off. Let's thank you very much. And again, I echo your thanks to Kelly and the great folks at Siemens who have been so loyal over the years in supporting this kind of educational programming. And so where do we go from here? Well, that's a great segue because you've got your handy little program book, and we are now on page 18. And page 18 will tell you that we have the resource exhibit hall opening right away. And what you're going to do is we're actually going down 2 levels. You're going to exit here. You'll see escalators that go down. You'll go down 2 levels to where the exhibit hall is opening. And I can't say enough about the important, loyal support of our business partners. And I want to emphasize that term, business partners. They're not vendors. They're not contractors. They're not salesmen. They're not consultants. They are our business partners. If we don't partner with them, our business is going to fail. That's the bottom line. We need them. They need us. And clearly it's a two-way street. So take the time to go down there, learn about some of the new approaches, new products, new systems that are available, because as you just heard, we've got to stay on the cutting edge, and they can help us do that. So enjoy the rest of your day. Keep your program, because we've got great breakout sessions later. You're going to be able to enjoy lunch down in the exhibit hall. And then, of course, later tonight we have the awards reception, and that'll be right down here on this level. So have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you all throughout the course of the conference. Thanks.